Hey, what's going on, gang? Nate on the Stone here. Welcome back to my channel. Well, it's happened again, gang. The entire world has changed on the turn of a dime. By this point, I know that you know about the riots that took place at the U.S. Capitol on January 6th while a joint session of Congress was officially counting the electoral votes that would have made Joe Biden the next president of the United States. Thanks, of course, to all of the shenanigans that happened on Election Day that we have talked about before. That same day, because people who had eyes to see knew what was happening, there were huge rallies in D.C. in a final show of support for President Trump. And one of those rallies at the U.S. Capitol building got a little hairy. As a matter of fact, people pushed their way, supposedly. Other reports say that they were let in by Capitol Police, but needless to say, a group of people got into the Capitol building, and the congressmen and the senators were boarded away somewhere, and while the mob, the so-called mob, actually just kind of walked around and didn't really do anything. They took some selfies of themselves and of their pals. They sat in some of the chairs. Someone walked off with Nancy Pelosi's podium, which was rather humorous, rather apropos of a great power going completely to pot. But because of this, we have more proof that Vladimir Lenin, the leader of the Bolshevik Revolution in Russia in 1918, he was one of those proverbial broken clocks who was right at least twice a day, because his saying, which I believe I've repeated before here on the channel, sometimes years pass and nothing happens, other times weeks pass and decades happen, has been proven right again. Because in the aftermath of that riot, so-called, we have been inundated with stories from the usual suspects about how this was a quote-unquote storming of the Capitol. This was an attempted coup. This was an act of desperation by white supremacists to delegitimize the votes of black and brown Americans in order to keep the white supremacist president, Donald Trump, in office for another 4 years. This is the narrative of the left. Never mind the goofiness of the story, okay? The left is actually repeating a strategy by Hitler, and I know that you're not supposed to make comparisons with Nazis, because if you do that, you supposedly have lost the argument. But Hitler was a master at this. Hitler knew that if you're going to tell a lie to the people, make it a big lie, because our psychology, for whatever reason, we are more prone to believe big lies than to believe little lies. So, that has been the narrative on the left. Now, before I go any further, I need to address one of the first of the elephants in the room. Anyone who says that this was a storming of the Capitol is either a liar or a historical ignoramus, because to equivocate what happened on January 6th with something like the storming of the Bastille is ludicrous. The Capitol building is still there. The people who rioted, they didn't tear it down, they didn't burn it down, unlike federal buildings in Seattle and Portland last summer, which did not survive their meetings with mobs and mobocrats. And for a storming of a Capitol building, it apparently was so low-key that members of Congress actually were able to reconvene later that same day and finish counting the electoral votes. Okay? No police even died. 4 people died. There was the U.S. Air Force veteran, that poor woman who was shot actually by a Capitol police officer. 3 other people died in separate medical emergencies, as the official reports go. And that was it. 4 deaths, which of course are tragic, but again, not exactly what you would think you would only have if this was actually a genuine storming, if this was the equivalent of the storming of the Bastille during the French Revolution. And no police officers even died either. When the French revolutionaries stormed the Bastille, they killed all the guards. Okay, I believe, if I'm remembering my history, there were only 3 prisoners in the Bastille at that time. One of them was the Marquis de Sade, which is where we get our word sadism But all the guards, the mob completely killed. Not one police officer here at the Capitol on January 6th was killed. 14 were injured, okay, which is okay. That's bad, but none of them were killed. So anyone who says that this was a storming is more than likely simply trying to push and promote an ideological lie. But what is much more fascinating, to me at least, was the aftermath of the so-called riot. Because, brother, if there was any question about where power and sovereignty lie in our country, it was made perfectly clear after January 6th. And heads up, tip, breaking news, extra, sovereignty and power does not reside with us, the people. There was a huge, and I know that you know this, gang, I'm kind of just setting up the groundwork here. There was a massive purge on social media. Twitter erased 80,000 plus accounts. Facebook decreed that all posts with the words "Stop the Steal" were going to be erased. And Donald Trump, the sitting president of the United States, let me remind you, was almost completely banished from social media entirely. He was banished from Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, Shopify, Pinterest, you name it, he was banished from it. All because he supposedly incited a riot. He incited a riot. He was leading sedition, even though, as David Marcus pointed out over at The Federalist in a great essay, which I will post in the description box below, he didn't do either according to the definition of those very words. Trump was not inciting violence, nor was he leading a sedition. To say that he was is to twist and realign those words for purely ideological purposes. But we are now seeing, gang, that this is the end game. This is the end game, because it wasn't just social media which went through a purge. No. If that's all that happened, that would have been bad, but it would have been expected, because social media always goes through these purges, because that is, as we've also talked about before here on the channel, that is the end goal of social media. It is domination. But this time, they took it a step further, which is what makes this, I'll just be honest, what makes it so terrifying, in a sense. Because social media, the big tech corporations, they weren't just content with kicking conservatives or people to the right of AOC, anyone to the right of AOC, it doesn't matter, off Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram. No, then they went after other social media platforms. You might have heard of another platform called Parler, P-A-R-L-E-R, which a lot of people call Parler. That's not technically how you're supposed to pronounce it. I believe it's supposed to be pronounced parler, which is a French verb meaning to speak, and I just used up for you all the last bit of French that I had retained in college, so you're very welcome for that. But Parler was a couple of years old. I believe it was founded in 2018. And a lot of conservatives who got kicked off of Twitter or who had just had enough with Twitter were going over to Parler. Trump was one of them. Well, after the January 6th riots at the Capitol, guess what, gang? Guess what, boys and girls? Parler was axed. Google said that Parler would no longer be hosted on the Google playlist. Apple said that you would no longer be able to find the app on the Apple App Store. Amazon said that it was no longer going to be hosting it. So basically, there is absolutely no way now for anyone to use Parler. I had a very, very, very small Parler account, and it was true. Every time I logged on there, it always said, oh, technical difficulties. Oh, the feed is not refreshing. Something is happening, and that's because no one was hosting it. It was basically a dead app. Now, Parler's CEO said at the beginning when this was happening that he was hoping that either they would be able to get this resolved with the big media tech companies. I believe that Parler issued some lawsuits against Apple and Amazon. Or he said, if worse comes to worse, we'll find someone else to host us. But that in itself may not happen, because did you know that the CEO of Parler had to flee his home? He is, as of this recording, in hiding with his family because of the number of death threats that he was receiving. Oh yeah, simply for being an alternative to Twitter. Simply for being what was becoming known as the conservative Twitter. It was basically becoming, in a sense, a conservative echo chamber, which wasn't good either. But again, it was a place where if you felt like Twitter was censoring you too much, throwing you in Twitter jail, it was a means of escape. It was a way for you to feel that you could still get your voice, your ideas, your opinions out there. Simply for that, he received enough death threats that he is now in hiding. He received death threats and security breaches, a court filing says. And that's really what this has shown, gang, because the censorship and the control, which we have seen time and time again on the social media platforms, has moved into real life. It's moved into real life. The CEO of Parler, okay, a guy by the name of John Matz, that's just one example. Did you know, for example, too, that Senator Josh Hawley, the junior senator from Missouri, he had a whole book lined up, ready to be published with Simon & Schuster about big tech censorship and why big tech has to be reined in. A very apropos book, by the by. Well, Simon & Schuster simply arbitrarily said, we're not going to publish his book. They let out a statement after the riots, after January 6th, and said, we're not going to publish Josh Hawley's book. Why? Because Josh Hawley himself had, quote-unquote, incited the riot first by daring to challenge the electoral vote, which, I will remind you all, gang, is the right and the prerogative of every sitting member of Congress. January 2017, when Joe Biden, who was then the vice president and then the president of the Senate, was officiating at the counting of the electoral ballots between Trump and Hillary Clinton for the 2016 campaign, Democrats 11 times stood up to oppose the vote, citing everything from the Civil Rights Act of 1965, the Voter Rights Act of 1965, to Russian interference, which we now know to be a canard and a fake chestnut. In 2017, Democrats 11 times challenged the electoral vote. Josh Hawley does it, and he is immediately guilty of sedition. And no kidding, gang, this is what people on the left are saying. People on the left are even saying now that Josh Hawley needs to be expelled from the Senate because he was inciting sedition by challenging the electoral vote. Okay? Senator from West Virginia, Joe Manchin, is one person who says that he and others, including Ted Cruz, need to be expunged from the Senate via the 14th Amendment, which says that no one who is found guilty of sedition or treason against the United States will be able to hold office. Now, we'll put that in your hat and keep that under your hat, okay, because we're going to come back to Joe Manchin in just a second. So, simply for doing his duty, simply for giving voice to the 74 million people who voted for Trump, and for all the people who said, hey, wait a minute, this election, things aren't adding up on this election, okay? Things aren't adding up. Simply for taking those concerns seriously, for doing something which he was in his power to do, Josh Hawley was told by Simon & Schuster, you can't have your book published. Now, fortunately, he found another publisher who is actually going to publish his book, so we are going to be able to read his case about why big tech needs to be reined in. Again, very apropos for our times. But let that sink in, gang. For doing his For exercising his constitutional power, Josh Hawley was guilty of sedition, and he was immediately punished. And this sort of punishment, gang, this is where we are now, gang. This is where we are. People are now going to be punished simply because of their political opinions, simply because of whom they voted for in the last election. Okay? And it's going to be more than just getting banned from Facebook, banned from Twitter, which again would be bad enough. No. They are now going to come after you yourself, not just your social media accounts. They are going to be coming after you. Okay? And it's not just going to be the powerful people. It's not going to be the Josh Hawleys and the Ted Cruzes, the people who actually have some political influence and some actual power. No, it's going to be people like you and me. Just the common people, the little guys who are just going about trying to earn a living, trying to get ahead in the world, trying to make our mark in the world, but who then raise our voices as citizen legislators of the supposedly greatest republic and greatest country in the world. When we raise our voices and voice our opinions that, hey, something doesn't seem right, they're going to punish us. Here are just a few examples. This is from Elle magazine by Anna Tingley. My mom joined a pro-Trump protest the night before the insurrection, so I outed her, meaning that she reported her mom to the authorities simply for attending a Trump rally. Again, her mom wasn't part of this quote-unquote insurrection. She wasn't part of the riot on January 6th. She just attended a pro-Trump rally in D.C. That's enough to get you outed by your own family members to the FBI and to other law enforcement agencies. Here's another example, gang, from PJ Media. Headline: Public school teacher pays a steep price for attending the DC Trump protest. Now, this is from the actual story. Quote, on January 7th, 2021, the Allentown School District was made aware of a staff member who was involved in the Electoral College protest that took place at the United States Capitol building on January 6th, 2021. Superintendent Thomas E. Parker said in a statement. Parker announced that the district had already penalized the teacher involved before opening an investigation. He cited the emotion and controversy over the Capitol riots. It appears the suspension involves Jason Moorhead, an assistant coach and social studies teacher. Moorhead shared a photo of himself at the protest wearing a Make America Great Again hat with the caption, "Doing my civic duty." Moorhead's presence at the protest means little. While the protest did indeed turn into a riot, only a tiny portion of the thousands who marched on the Capitol actually engaged in any violence, and there does not appear to be any evidence this teacher broke into the Capitol. So in other words, again, for simply attending a rally, for simply exercising his First Amendment rights of free speech and free assembly, and also petition, this teacher is now being investigated. This teacher could very well lose his job simply for doing what every American is supposed to do. Every American is supposed to be involved in the system. Every American is supposed to be engaged in the public square because that's what it takes to keep a Republican-style government. For doing that, this teacher is going to be punished. That is what's happening. But it gets even better, gang. There's more, as my clip says. Because it is now it's not simply if you go to the wrong things even, or say the wrong things on Twitter, that'll get you in trouble. Now, simply because you voted the wrong way, simply because your political affiliations are the wrong sort, you are now an enemy of the people. Let me give you some more examples. This from Yahoo News. Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez says that the nation can only heal once oppressed southern states are liberated. I wonder what liberation means in AOC's mind. I wonder how she envisions liberation to work. The Hill had a story where Nancy Pelosi said that the people at the riot, okay, the people of the January 6th Capitol riot, they chose their whiteness over democracy. Now, really sit down, gang, and think about that for 1 second. The rioters chose their whiteness over democracy. Okay, never mind about how ridiculous it sounds. Let me spell out the implication of what Pelosi said. The Speaker of the House, okay, who is in the line of succession for the presidency. The old saying is that there's only a heartbeat between the vice presidency, the vice president, and the presidency. Because, of course, if anything happens to the president, of course, the vice president becomes the president. Well, there are only 2 heartbeats standing between Nancy Pelosi, the Speaker of the House, and the presidency. Because if Joe buys the farm and Kamala cashes in her chips, it's going to be President Pelosi. Okay? Really think about this. When she says that the rioters, January 6th, chose their whiteness over democracy, she is saying that every single person in America who happens to be white is a potential domestic terrorist. Okay? Because, of course, you can't choose whiteness unless you're white, or unless, of course, you believe in all the things that the left tells you you shouldn't believe in. So if you're white, or if you simply happen to disagree with the left, you are a potential terrorist. You're a potential domestic enemy, simply because of your skin color or because your political ideas don't exactly square up in a line with what the left wants. This is it. This is it, gang. So as you can see, through this progression, everything has changed. Because now, as I said before at the beginning, it's not just social media. They are coming after you. They are coming after you. And they're making absolutely no bones about it. You are now the enemy. You are now the enemy. People on Twitter, I've seen it on social media, have been trying to jovially asking, well, what's the left going to do now that Trump isn't in office? I mean, they're not going to be able to blame him for anything. Ha ha, they really stepped into it this time. No, people, because they are simply going to pull an old switcheroo and replace Trump with his voters. Not even just his supporters, but with his voters. Anyone who voted, who pulled the lever for Trump, for whatever reason. Maybe you couldn't stand the guy. I wasn't his biggest fan by any stretch of the imagination. But if you voted for him for any reason, maybe because you wanted to keep the 2017 tax cuts, maybe because you wanted another economic recovery after this never-ending pandemic finally ends, like what happened at the beginning of his term of office. Maybe because you were still concerned about illegal immigration. Maybe because you wanted someone who actually didn't just talk tough to China, but was actually willing to do something to stop China from becoming the dominant global power. It could have been any one of those reasons, any mishmash of those reasons, or any of those reasons in between. Heck, maybe you just liked them because of the hair. I don't know. Maybe because you liked him because of that cameo that he had in Home Alone 2. Okay? Doesn't matter. For whatever reason that you voted for Trump, you are now the enemy. For whatever reason, you are now the enemy. I wish I could say the right was completely opposed to this. That the right was completely out in force with this. But they're not. That has been the astounding thing about this gang. That has been really the most astounding and also the most heartbreaking thing about this whole bloody business, is that the right has proven itself, I hate to say it, but the right has proven itself to be a joke. You have, on the one hand, the conservative establishment types, like David French, who used to write for National Review, who was actively applauding Twitter kicking the sitting president off of its platform saying that it was just an exercise of liberty. David French went so far as to support Amazon for axing Parler. I'm sorry, but if you are for the consolidation of power by the big tech monoliths, you're not a conservative, or your definition of conservatism is worse than useless. So you have the establishment types, like French and Brad Palumbo and Tiana Lowe, who wanted to see, for example, Josh Hawley punished, who applauded Trump getting kicked off of social media platforms. Again, even though he had not incited people to riot, he had not encouraged people to become violent, he had not led a sedition or anything like that. And they were actually perfectly fine with a social media platform getting axed, simply because of what a few people were saying on it, which actually is not their fault per Section 230. And one of those weird ironies, David French is a guy, just a little aside, David French is a guy who has said that we can't even touch Section 230 of the Communications Decency Act of 1996, because that would be a huge assault on the First Amendment, a horrible attack on free speech. But when Amazon, Apple, Google Play all axe Parler, the official version is because white supremacists were using it to spew hatred and plot violence. Section 230 apparently doesn't apply to them. Again, Section 230 says that platforms cannot be held responsible for what their users say on those platforms. They cannot be held responsible. Apparently that no longer applies to the wrong sort of social media platforms, and David French is fine with that. Okay, Nate, okay, you might be saying, but that's the establishment type. Those are the squishes, the jellyfish, the brain stems. We know that we can't count on them, but the new guard, oh boy, we can definitely count on them. No, we can't, gang. I wish I was wrong, but we can't. I'm not going to go through every dot and jab, but let me just highlight some that caught my eye in the immediate aftermath of January 6th. Lauren Chen on Twitter came out and decried the riot by saying violence doesn't make the world a better place. Really? So the world wasn't made a better place during the Punic Wars when ancient Rome destroyed ancient Carthage? The world wasn't made a better place in 1099 when the First Crusade actually liberated Jerusalem from the Seljuk Turks. The world wasn't made a better place when England actually defeated the Spanish Armada at the end of the 16th century. The world wasn't made a better place when the American colonists finally decided that they had had it up to here with King George III and his parliament and started fighting in April of 1775. The world wasn't made a better place when the American Civil War began in 1861, which helped to end slavery in the Western Hemisphere, which was something unprecedented in world history. A real historical moment, by the way, the abolition of slavery in the Western Hemisphere. Are we saying that the world wasn't made a better place because Great Britain declared war on Nazi Germany on September 1st of 1931? Are we saying that the world wasn't made a better place because NATO went to war against North Korea in 1950? Now, I'm not going to sit here and say that every act of violence is okay. Every act of violence has made the world better. I'd be a fool if I said that. I would even entertain the argument that most violence is bad. But to say that all violence doesn't make the world a better place, that violence in general doesn't make the world a better place, is naive and ahistorical on a massive scale. It's just as ideological as anything that the left says. But okay, you might be saying, okay, violence, we can't become violent. We can't become violent. We can't become what the left has become. And besides, we need to fight this legally. We need to be legal about this. That's what Ian Miles Chong said, who is the editor of Human Events, a digital magazine. Well, unfortunately, there's a problem with that too, gang, because the justice system is dead. The justice system in the United States is dead. We no longer have equality before the law. We now have a two-tier system of justice. And let me just give you another example, okay? If you saw any clips or photographs from the storming of the Capitol building, then you probably saw the QAnon shaman, who is the guy with the painted face. He had the faux fur on his head. He had these synthetic buffalo horns on his head. The guy looked like a real clown. Okay? The guy's name, by the by, is Jacob Chansley. Okay? Well, Jacob Chansley was arrested for storming the Capitol. He has been denied bail. And if he is actually given the harshest sentence which can be given to him, he faces 25 years in prison. Meanwhile, John Earl Sullivan, who was also arrested for participating in the riots at the Capitol on January 6th, not only did Utah District Magistrate Judge Daphne Oberg release him from jail, but she released him on jail without bail. John Earl Sullivan didn't even have to pay bail in order to get out of jail for rioting at the Capitol. Why, you might ask? Well, it might be because John Earl Sullivan is at least partially black, unlike Chansley, and John Earl Sullivan just happens to be a member of BLM. He happens to be a Black Lives Matter activist. So, once again, if you are the right color and if you have the right policies, the right ideas, you don't have to go to jail for nothing. If you're white and if you have the wrong political ideas, you're going to get the book thrown at you. And that's really what I want to ask. That's really what I want to end this video on, gang. To ask the question again, where do we go from here? When you have unprecedented pushback, an unprecedented backlash by the big tech monopolies, which seriously control our lives. Think about all the times that you go onto Google, all the times you use Amazon, all the times you're on Twitter and Facebook and Instagram. When those centers of power can just vaporize your presence with the push of a button, when you are declared a domestic terrorist, a potential domestic terrorist, just because you have paler skin or just because you don't think that biological males should be using the female restrooms, which we can now look forward to thanks to an executive order by President Biden, when there are two clear systems of justice now, depending on your color and your political alignments. When you are punished, when you, your family, your livelihood are all threatened, simply when you peacefully exercise your rights of free speech, free assembly, and free petition, where do we go from here? This is a serious question, gang. This is a serious question that I have been asking, that I have been posing to you since the election, which was now 2 months ago. We've been talking about revolution here on the channel. We are going to continue talking about revolution. We're also going to continue to talk about some other important topics that are happening, okay? I'm done now. We're still going to be doing looking at individual stories on the Rolling Stone, but these videos I want to be big picture because Western civilization is dying. Western civilization, the United States of America, it's not just dying. It's not just, oh, it might be going the way of the dodo. It's here. The moment is here. And we have to decide now whether we are going to cross the Rubicon or not. And if we decide to cross the Rubicon, we are going to have to decide what that is going to look like. I'm not saying anything definite right now, but I will say this. When everything is aligned against you, when you have absolutely no platform, When you can't even create your own platform to try to get your ideas and your arguments out there. Again, look at Parler. When you cannot even trust the courts to be objective because we are no longer equal before the law, what options do we have? What options do we have? People like Ben Shapiro, the Wunderkind Ben Shapiro, they're putting all of their hopes on one man, or the equivalent. In Ben Shapiro's case specifically, he's saying that we all have to put our hopes on Joe Manchin, the aforementioned senator from West Virginia, because, hey, he's not as crazy as AOC and some of the others, which, again, is small consolation. But again, this is the same Senator Joe Manchin who said that Ted Cruz and Josh Hawley need to be expelled from the Senate through the 14th Amendment because they were inciting sedition. Memo to Ben Shapiro, that guy is not the best pet. He's not the best bet to put a Hail Mary on. Okay? He's not going to come through on your Hail Mary play. He is not the only saving grace that the Republic has. We can't put our hope in one person. We can't put our hope in one politician, even though, for example, I love Josh Hawley. He's not going to save the Republic. We can't put our hope on one commentator. Glenn Beck certainly isn't going to save the Republic. I mean, he's been doing commentary for how many years now? 10 years now? Things are worse than ever. All he's done is sell books and made some money by doing it. All he's done is gotten more programs so people have more incentive to buy a subscription to the Blaze TV and to keep renewing their subscription. And meanwhile, everything outside of that bubble has deteriorated at lightning speed. We can't depend on the politicians. We can't depend on the commentators. We can only depend on the divine and on ourselves. And again, how that looks like, I am going to refrain from saying anything right now, gang. We will in future videos. Believe me, we will. But I am going to leave you with that question, and I will say this. The answer, I'm afraid, is becoming clearer and clearer by the day. But that is all for right now, gang. Thank you for putting up with another rather unusual video. My apologies for getting these out late. Work has been hectic, and with so much breaking news happening, you're almost inundated with it. And I finally just decided, no, it had been too long, needed to get a video out, and this is the result. So, stay safe, stay free, gang. I'll talk to you soon. Again, I'll leave you with one quote, actually. I'll leave you with one quote that I came across again in David McCullough's book, 1776, which actually would be a great book to read this year for a multitude of reasons. General Henry Knox, one of the generals in Washington's inner circle, wrote to his wife and said, "We want great men who, when fortune frowns, will not be discouraged." True in 1776 and true now. I'll talk to you later, gang. Take care.